You're listening to the Holistic Spaces podcast brought to you by Mindful Design Feng Shui School. Episode 109, Feng Shui 101. What is Feng Shui? Welcome to episode 109 of the Holistic Spaces podcast, where we hope to inspire, educate, and empower you to create your own holistic spaces that nurture and resonate with you. Angie Cho and Laura Morris are the founders of the Mindful Design Feng Shui School. Together, we have over 3 decades of experience designing harmonious spaces with our clients in our successful design businesses. Through articles, books, workshops, videos, TV appearances, and consultations, and through our school, we have guided thousands of people to shift their energy and revitalize their living spaces. Mindful Design School is our school, and we are the ones that are bringing you the podcast. We offer feng shui courses and certifications. So it's a really great way to support us if you've been listening to the podcast for a while. And you can check out what we have available at mindfuldesignschool.com. So thanks for joining us. And so Laura and I were brainstorming at the end of last year on how to create like a more robust offering for all of you with the podcast. So one of the things that we did was we went from recording this podcast twice a month to now offering it every week. So we hope you guys are enjoying that, because Laura was telling me that because Laura loves podcasts, and she said when she has a podcast that she loves, she wants more and more and more and more, right?
Yep, exactly.
So, yeah. And then we also thought we could have a once a month offering, which we would call Feng Shui 101. And we would kind of go back to the basics. And, we have a lot of the older, earliest podcast episodes where I went over the basics, but it's always great because Laura and I are always evolving our relationship to Feng Shui. We're always evolving what it means to us. And then obviously it would be great for you to have Laura's take on the feng shui basics. So we're not going to redo them, but we're going to just revisit. And it's always good to have a beginner's mind and go back to the basics, right?
Yep, agreed. Yeah, and there's always, just talking about it, different things come up, and it's never a waste of time to go back and just talk about the simple parts and the basics. Absolutely, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Because also we both abide by the thought that simple can understand complex, but complex doesn't understand simple. So we really value going back to the basics, going back to the foundations.
Hmm.
And so we wanted to start at the very beginning and talk about what is feng shui. So I'll start
Hmm.
with feng shui. What is feng shui? So feng shui is a Chinese word, and it's an art of how to begin to look at your environment and how it affects you energetically. And it was developed in ancient China. And the words feng shui literally translate to wind and water. Feng is wind and shui is water. And this term comes from an ancient poem, and where it talks about the different elements of nature and how we can live in harmony with nature. So that really gets to what feng shui is about. It's about how we can begin to live in harmony with nature and how to create built environments that can respect, acknowledge, and be in tune and actually harness the positive aspects of the natural world.
Yeah, that's a good way. Yeah, that is. Um, I think that's a good way to think of it, almost a little more broadly, and not just try and pigeonhole it as being something that is really, it is in parts about placing things in certain places, but that's really not the heart of the practice. And I think, when you get at the, it's not about superstition. It's not about um, doing little things in little places, although that is a fun and simple thing you can do. At the heart of the practice, the foundation of the practice is really, like you said, is we live in a different time. I mean, we live in a hectic time. We create these environments, we create spaces, we live in the world, and it is a practice that evolves and comes from ancient roots about how to live in this world using principles and systems and methods that are connected to honoring energies in nature, I think. And the systems, that the cosmological ideas of how things flow, the cycles of nature, our own states of being and how that shifts, and really trying to make sense of it all. And so that when we are in a home or in outside in something we've created, we feel at ease and we feel more comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to point out is that um, Feng Shui is also an Eastern practice. It's based on Eastern tradition and Eastern philosophy, where it's a yes and, not a this or that.
Mhm.
So when Laura is talking about, well, it's deep practice, not necessarily about adding things here and there, but it is also about adding things here and there. So it's a yes
Mm.
and things are it's in a lot of ways can be paradoxical, which a lot of Western and I grew up in the West, so our viewpoint, and actually this human viewpoint, is really difficult sometimes for us to wrap our heads around. Like, how can it be yes and, isn't it either or? But
Mhm.
I think especially younger people, because Laura and I are really old, um younger people are really starting to embrace this, like with gender fluidity. Like, how do you be yes and yeah. Oh, something, actually, before we get into this, Laura put together a really nice outline for us to talk about. But I am listening to this book about the foundations of Asian civilization, our civilization in the East. And they were talking about yin and yang, which is one of the oldest concepts that is the basis of Eastern civilization. And it started out, and it basically just means the sunny side of the hill or the shady side of the hill.
Mhm.
So that's feng shui.
Yep. And when we start teaching our students, that comes up a lot. I mean, there is a particular adjustment that we do with a mirror that is literally about creating a mini sunny side of the mountain and a mini sunny moon side or shady side of the mountain. Yeah, it is that fundamental. But then, what happens is, and I mean, again, I'm not saying you can't do this. It's just when you, like you said, when you think that that's all of it, is we start to, and I mean, everyone does this now with yin and yang. Like, okay, so yang is man or masculine, and then yin is feminine. And, you get really rigid because it is fun to sort of go and put them in boxes. You really do have to go back to, okay, what are we talking about this on a really broad scale so we don't get pigeonholed into rules, like really strict rules.
Yeah, and that's why we like to use the word guidelines. But
Or or it depends.
or it depends. Yeah, yeah. Our teachers were so funny. The answer to there would be maybe a barrage of answers, and then it would always end with the option "it depends" or "other." So it can be, maybe, I think some of our students kind of find it really challenging at first, but I think when you begin to open up to it, it becomes quite liberating and really beautiful, in the sense of the infinity of it, right? It's you can step out of time and not be constrained by this linear A to B or A or B, but rather go into infinity, where this infinite space where things can conflict but be different, but be the same. So there's a lot of beauty in that.
Yeah, and I think it is a testament to the practitioner uh, to use that creativity and discernment, and to know that just there are no specific rules. It's really about you using your own judgment, your own critical thinking, your training, your compassion, your flexibility to come up with solutions that really work, and that there's not a lot of, you know, oh, well, it always has to be done this way. So therefore XYZ. Whereas as a when you start to practice it for a while and you start to, step back from all the rules or the feeling that, everything has to be like a certain way, you can see the flexibility in this practice, which for me is really important. And it is, and the flexibility and the ability to bring in your own, yes, you bring in your own tuition, you use it, you start there, and then you use the methods and the tools that you're given, but you also layer on top your own wisdom, like your own and your critical thinking, and you're realizing and really showing up for the client or for whoever you're practicing for, with saying, okay, well, what does this really mean? So I think, and then you can get really creative, and then that's where the practice is really powerful. It's a combination of all of these things, which takes time. I mean, it's easy. It wouldn't it be so much easier if really you could just go buy an exact guidebook and you always knew everything? I mean, right? But that's not the practice.
Yeah. I think I know that sometimes we offer checklists, and basically that's for the masses. But when we work with our students, we challenge them, and we don't want to give anyone a checklist, because it's, it actually provides constraints and limitations, rather that feeling of infinity. And Laura, you were talking about earlier, like how feng shui is a living, breathing practice. So that's like, it's also, yeah, you don't want to, would you as a human want to be put in a box? So the practice is also alive.
And I think, yeah, I mean, yes, it's an ancient lineage, but this is where using your flexibility, seeing how it can evolve, you know, situations are different, clients are different, and you need to co-create, and you need to keep the essence of the practice and the heart of the practice in mind. But really, yeah, it's got flexibility, which I really like.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder if some people are, especially maybe new listeners, some people are surprised at this, because they might just think, oh, it's about the right way or the wrong way to do something.
Mhm.
And it's funny, because I was telling Laura, so I do a lot of IGTVs, Instagram TV. So if you don't follow me on Instagram, you should definitely do that, because I create a lot of videos almost every day and give some kind of feng shui support. And I only keep it up there like a few days. And the most recent ones I've done that are the most popular have negative words in them. So it's like bad feng shui plants or feng shui mistakes. And it's kind of sad that that's what people are attracted to. But really, Laura and I really want to shift this perception that feng shui is really a compassionate practice, and it's not about good or bad and strict rules and regulations. And if you do this, you have the worst feng shui in the world.
Yeah, yeah, the fear. And but I think people do see, this is the thing. People like to have absolutes often, and they like to be told what to do. And I think that's where you have to be careful as a practitioner, or even when, for those that are doing it, you want, and there's nothing wrong with you expecting someone to come and hold space for you and to tell you, really, what do I need to do? Like, what should I do in order for you know, I need, I'm feeling low in this particular area of my life, or my home is not supporting me and whatever. I mean, you obviously want somebody to show up and hold space and have some answers, right? And that is part of it. But we try and encourage, I mean, and this is taking a long time, but I've tried to show up with not with without having a list of all the answers. So yes, you obviously want to come up. You have this training. That's why we do it. We train for this. It's not stuff we're just making up. And so yes, we have answers. We say, yes, if this is this, but then you ask a series of questions, and then you start to dive a little bit deeper. So I think the compassion there for me is not creating fear, showing up with the knowledge and the wisdom and the knowledge that you have, the real, the training basically. And then, but really being able to hold space for clients. So yes, they want answers, and that's completely fair. But there is an appealing thing to have being told, never do this, or always do this. And because it's absolute, right? I mean, there's no gray areas. And so I think it's really appealing, and it's human nature, right? It's appealing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. But we really do want to focus, Laura and I mean, different people have different approaches. Our approach is out of compassion and not a practice of fear. Um, and hopefully the listeners, you understand that. Because really when it also what it really comes down to, it's all about the energy, the chi, right?
Mhm.
And chi in itself doesn't necessarily actually need to be good or bad. It actually can contain both. Here's where it's yes and one of my I'm taking the shamanic energy healing training, and the teacher said the best protection is healing yourself, which is, I think, something that really stood out to me, because as a feng shui practitioner and teacher, I think a lot of people come to us, right, Laura,
Mhm.
out of fear, and they want
Mhm.
protection.
Yeah.
And really, when you've healed yourself and you start working on your own journey, is when you're truly can be open and protected at the same time. Whereas if you're living out of fear, then you always want to protect yourself, but you're not really, you're in pain. So
Mhm.
what is the protection even doing?
Mhm. But that's the hardest work, right? So that's something I do love about this practice in some ways. So yes, we know when we work with a client, especially because we're outside of it, we see, okay, this isn't about they come with fear, like you were saying, like, oh my God, I'm missing my wealth area, or I'm doing this, or oh my God, I have a toilet here. Oh my gosh, tell me what to do and fix it. It's like, okay, here are things that you can do, but you do want to you want to unpack and get to the heart of what's going on there in their terms of their personal chi, that they have this fear, that there's this worry. And that's, of course, there are many things we do in feng shui and in our practice to work with that as well. Not every client is there, and they may not want to do that right away, and that's fine. So the thing I love about this practice is that you can show up, you can use your training, you can do specific adjustments that are that are physical, like that are in the space, that are grounded in our training, the wisdom, the lineage, chi, all these things that make sense. Sometimes they're mundane, and all these things come together. It makes the client feel, yes, okay, we're working with something, or I see this. And then that opens up, I think, to the next step, where you can start to really feel good about moving into working with your own personal chi, which is way tougher, right? And
Mm.
something that you don't need to jump into right away. It's good to be able to focus on the space. I'm glad that we have that in this practice, I have to say.
Yeah, I think on one level, it's really approachable, because a lot of people can easily make that connection to creating a physical shift in their home. So we had to pause for a second. Now, what was it I was saying, Laura?
Well, we were talking about the physical space. The beauty of this practice is the fact that, luckily we have this physical area, the environment to work with, to help shift our clients' chi to work
Oh,
with it.
right. Yeah. So I think it's I was saying that I think it's a pretty easy, approachable thing, feng shui, because sometimes people have a really easy time changing their space. Some people don't. It depends, but it can be like kind of like a gateway drug to shift to opening up to other healing modalities. Um, and it's also, I think, beautiful feng shui because it's really connecting heaven and earth. So there's this concept in Taoism, which we'll talk about in a second, and in Eastern traditions called connecting heaven and earth. And so heaven is kind of like our destiny and what we're given, and earth is the feng shui. So we can start to look at how to shape our destiny and bring it down to earth, because we're all living, although it's about the energy, it's about the chi. Laura, we should have a whole episode that talks about chi as
We
well.
do.
But
Yeah, we do. It's on the schedule. It's going to be
okay.
one of our 101s. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so even though we have we're and energy is important, we can't forget about the physical world too, because we're living in this dimension where we're in a physical world. So we all know people that maybe like have mental health issues, and they're maybe not living in this dimension so much. And so it's difficult to get along. So there's quite a skill and value in being able to connect heaven and earth. And that's part of the purpose of Feng Shui. How can we begin to connect the heaven energy to the earth realm?
Yeah. Okay, so I think that kind of works into the second part of this, which I wanted to talk about. Which, well, there's two other things, but I thought we could talk a little bit about what are some of the methods, the systems that Feng Shui practitioners use. So we talked about our training, because as we say, we show up, we work with clients, or so as a practice, there are tools, there are systems, there are methods, and so, one of you learn a lot. You kind of maybe you have this big toolkit, for lack of a better way of talking about it, and they're all, many of them are based on cosmological systems from Taoism. So the five elements and all of these things we're going to actually break out and do in a 101, just in a 101. So we'll talk a bit, we won't go into super depth here, but the five elements is a system that is, again, that whole idea of connecting with nature, and the idea that there are certain types of energy and chi that refer back to characteristics, essences that you would find in nature, and how can we work with those and cycle those and use those, right? And then yin and yang, that's born out of yin and yang as well. So that's both of those sort of Taoist cosmological systems.
Yes. And then another tool that we have that most people are familiar with is called the Feng Shui Bagua map. And Ba means 8 and Gua means areas. So it means 8 areas. And it's really a mandala of energy. It's an energetic symbol, and it is a divination tool that allows us to see how our life is connected to the cosmos, to different states of being, to the patterns and cycles of nature, and how that is overlaid on our home, which is another symbol of our home, is a symbol and an energetic representation of our lives. And yeah, and they're interconnected.
Yeah. And it's a way for us to divine as well some information, but it's always referred back to these it is a cosmological system in itself, the Bagua, because it's, yes, it's part divination, but it's partly also about states of being and how our own life shifts into different states and moves. The next thing I was thinking of is just reading the chi of a home. So the environment, that there are specific design details, there are specific ways of looking at space that tell us stuff. And that's another thing that we use as practitioners. And we learn, the way doors line up, the way a hallway flows, the way, the whole floor plan, how it works, or if you're looking at a plot of land. So those kind of things are really reading the chi of the home or the environment and seeing how that flows. And that's sort of a broad topic, and there's many, many ways to do it, but that's another key thing, I think, as practitioners that we use.
Yeah, and that's something that we really, well, these three of the many tools in the feng shui toolkit are like the five elements, yin and yang, the bagua, reading the chi of the home, the design details. And this is just some of the things that we teach our students. So and I guess there's a lot of listeners who are just newbies, and we want you to we want you to know that there's something more. It's not just a easy DIY recipe book, but it can be. That's why it's yes and but yes and. So yes, that can really make a huge shift. One change in your home could shift your entire life. At the same time, there's so much depth, and that's something that we need to honor the cultural tradition and the background and the lineage of this practice, and really respect those practitioners and teachers that really spend their whole lives cultivating this wisdom, and not just like not take like a weekend workshop and read a book, and then it's not that easy. But if you're doing it for yourself, you can be told like one thing to do, and that can make a huge shift.
Yeah. And for those listeners, a lot of our podcasts, we always like to give people takeaways, simple things that you can do. And for me, it's simple things that you can do for feng shui, but they always tie back to the essence of the practice, right? So it's not like, it's not, maybe they may not be sexy, like kind of like, like really glamorous, but they're very simple approaches and simple things you can do that are effective. Because again, we're all about simple being more powerful than, a lot of glam and jazz hands, and simple that really tie back to the essence. So if we tell you put a plant here in a specific place, it sounds so simple, but really it's tying back to this concept of the five elements, right? And it's tying back, or it's tying to the Bagua, and it's the essence is, well, we really want to work with vital chi. I mean, let's be really simple about this. So, and those kind of things, yes, it might seem kind of simplistic, but that's the practice. So if you can kind of wrap your head around that part of the practice, then you can start to get sexier, for lack of a better word, right? Going forward. And then before, I wanted to also talk a little bit about, there are many schools and approaches to feng shui, and that is okay. And I think a lot of people don't actually know this. So there's many modalities, there's many energy practices that have more than one approach. This is a common thing. You have it in yoga. You have it where you have a practice that has developed over time, and it has sort of splintered off into different ways of doing it and approaches and schools. But at the end of the day, you find the school, the approach that really resonates with you, but also they should all align with the same goal of really improving the quality of our lives and really looking at it and connecting back to the heart of that practice that we talked about. At least that's what I think for me. So there's many ways of doing it. And we practice a very specific one, which we've mentioned, which is Black Sect, or commonly called BTB. But there's many other schools, and we won't get into them all here, but it's something that people don't know, and it is part of. So if we're talking about what is feng shui, that's part of it. It's something you should know.
Yeah, and we're very inclusive here. and not everyone is, and that's okay too. So Laura and I just are who we are, and we were trained by our teachers, and so Laura and I have like a very integrated approach. And
well, again, it comes back to the idea of compassion, right? And I mean, that's the heart of the practice. The practice isn't, and fear, like no fear. The practice is to be inclusive, to be compassionate, to be flexible, so that you can't, for us in our practice, we recognize all forms of feng shui. We just choose a very specific way of practicing it. So
yes. And we also do acknowledge that when we're teaching, in the sense that we teach from the way that we were taught. So we're passing it down the way that we were taught, with the words that we were taught, and we very much respect that. And if we do shift from that, we acknowledge that as well. And we just think that you should, if you're curious, there's two approaches. One is go to the one that you're most called to, or the school that has the teachers that are that resonate with you. I don't recommend anyone just mix and match, because that's very inappropriate to just kind of mash everything together without understanding. And I think another approach is to look at trying to stick to one boat instead of shopping around. And I understand some people have the personality type where they really want to shop around, and I'm encouraging that if that's your thing. But I personally am one that goes with I go on intuition, and kind of know immediately like what resonates with me, and I don't need to shop around because it's a lot of energy to expend to only just get back to the beginning. So we encourage you to stick to one boat, find the boat that resonates with you. And if you become an expert of all of it, sure, you can come up with your own, but maybe don't call it feng shui, because feng shui is a lineage based practice, right?
Yeah, and it's okay to jump from one ship to another because I did that.
Oh, that's well, you jumped ship once though.
Early on though, I jumped ship I jumped ship once. Yeah. And then now since then, I mean, that was quite a while ago and I've been pretty much on this boat for a while. But I'm still informed of what the other boats are doing.
Mhm.
And so I know enough about that, but when I'm actually practicing it, I don't mix and match. But it's good. Hey, information is good. Critical thinking about what's going on, looking at what's around you, that's all important. But it's good to have that kind of discernment. But at the end of the day, when I actually practice it, yeah, I just stick with the one school, which is for me is the one that it clicked for me. The approach made sense for me, and I liked the flexibility and the compassion of the practice, at the heart of the practice. So
Yeah, but I also kind of look at it like, the sticking to one boat is also it's a little bit like how another buzzword is clutter, how we've developed clutter in our modern lives, that we have so much access to so many different things, so many different objects, so many different forms of information. And so when we have more than we need, it's hard to digest it. So we can approach it just like with food, right? Like we want to look at food where we don't have we're not bringing together like a lot of ingredients, right? We want to keep things more simple with how we're eating, because part of our modern world is that we've made it much more complex with chemicals and lots of different processed things, right? So we want to simplify the way we eat. We want to simplify our homes, having less things. We want to simplify our lives. We have like these devices that have so much communication. So this is also true in how we receive knowledge and wisdom. The more we can see the thread, the more I think we can receive.
yes, so basically just because you can doesn't mean you should. Just because you can learn it doesn't mean you should learn it. Basically, find one, decide, especially if you're deciding that this is what you're going to train in. Definitely. I mean, if you're going to start to work, it's good to really understand it. But that's also the water in me too, really like knowing the depth, going deep on one thing rather than sort of, all over the place. So that's it's a very watery approach too.
Yeah, deep like the ocean, not shallow like a pond.
Good, deep, dark water. Yeah, so I think so that was our intro into Feng Shui 101, and it's our approach. So you're not going to read this in a book, probably what we just talked about you for however long we were talking. That's definitely Angie and my definition of what is feng shui, and all of those. So what we're going to do going forward is we'll dive deeper into the little bitty parts, and then you can understand the bagua or yin and yang or five elements, or we'll take it from there and just little different things. So we started today with what is feng shui from our perspective, but of course giving you some background that is universal as well.
Yeah, and we actually have a podcast schedule with a lot of fun stuff coming up, but Laura's kind of taking the lead on the Feng Shui 101. So we're going to talk about qi and yin and yang. And then we have a bunch of stuff. So hopefully you guys are enjoying the Holistic Spaces Astrology forecast that we'll have next week. And then we have some fun episodes and some fun, exciting guests coming soon. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Holistic Spaces podcast. You can tune in every Monday now for a new podcast episode. And if you like our podcast and this episode, please share it with others. You could subscribe, leave a review. And you can always support the podcast by checking out our school, mindfuldesignschool.com. We have a Feng Shui certification program if you really want to dive deep, but we also have we have smaller courses, and just see what we have at mindfuldesignschool.com. We also have a blog there, and you can sign up for a newsletter, which is really great because there's some special offers that we only share with our newsletter subscribers. And if you'd like to explore the world of holistic spaces and feng shui on an even deeper level, you can visit holisticspaces.com and again, mindfuldesignschool.com, because we have a blog there. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.